And now, a story from the Appleseed.
This particular story is a personal story. I like telling all kinds of stories. And there are so many genres of stories. And sometimes people don't realize there's lots of different things. So folk tales, fairy tales, personal stories and narratives, historical stories. There are original stories, things that, a person creates at that moment. Of course, there's lies and tall tales, jokes and riddles. Lots and lots of different kinds of stories. And honestly, I like telling them all. So this is one of my personal stories. It was 2009, and I was attending a church, and I learned they went on mission trips. I had never been on a mission trip. I'd heard that people went on mission trips, but I'd never been on one. I'd always been curious. We always raised money for people to go on missions, but we never did it ourselves. And suddenly I was at a place where people went to places. And so there was an opportunity for me to go. And the first place that I had the opportunity to go was Vietnam. Now, before I went to Vietnam, I wanted to talk to my dad. My father was in the Vietnam War, and I wanted to make sure that he was okay with this particular trip. I felt it was really important to honor him as much as I could. And when I asked him, he was appreciative I did, and he said, "Yes, you're going for a good thing. Go." And so I went to Vietnam. And so we were there. And being there was like being in the United States in some ways. There were more traffic than we ever had in our streets. And it was busy, but there was a KFC. And that was exciting. And we could eat there. And it was a beautiful, beautiful place. And we were there around Christmas. And they celebrate Christmas there. They celebrate it very big. They celebrate it with presents and Santa. And that's about it. And they love the songs of Christmas. So it was really interesting to be there. And I learned so much while I was there, just about the people, about the language, about those that were actually being in a place where to serve or to worship a God, to go to a church was illegal. Meeting in people's houses so that we could learn together. That's part of what I did and what I learned. And meeting people was all we did and share our lives. I enjoyed being there, of course, and I enjoyed learning things. We went to go see Ho Chi Minh's tomb. It's a big deal. But it's also a sacred place. So we, being very good people, we got in line and we were very quiet because they will get you out of line because there are armed guards there. So you are going to be quiet and kind and respectful, which we all need to be. To other people's places of sacredness, we should be respectful. Whether we agree or not, respect is always good. And so I stood in line, and this guard looked at me. And then he went to another guard. And then he came back and looked at me. Then he went to another guard, and he said, something, 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 Oprah, something, something, something. And so all the guards turned to look at me, and they all agreed, something, 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 Oprah. And when I met the students, we worked with a group of students that were Christian students, and they were sharing the gospel as well. And I went to, and they said, "Oh, we want you to come with us." And I'm like, oh my goodness, here I go. And they wanted me to come because many of the students had never met a Black person before at all, or an African-American person. And so they would take me around, and I would tell stories, and they would just love the stories that I told. And then students would just come around just so they could be with me. And they were like, "Oh, you are just like Oprah. Oh, you are just like her in every way." And I was like, wow. So I got in a lot of doors that some people didn't get into. We went to another town, and I thought it was a town, but now later I learned it's the third largest city in in Vietnam. And while we were there, we were going to visit the orphanage. It was an orphanage that our church had worked with for years. They had been going for years. They'd seen young people go through the orphanage and go on to do great things. They had been there, and they'd been supporting this orphanage for a long time. And all they could talk about was how much fun they had with these kids, how the kids were so welcoming, how the staff loved them. It was great. Well, they wanted me to tell stories, and I was delighted. I had worked on a story that was a Vietnamese folk tale, so I would be able to do that, and I was going to use that as a way to enter into a story and then end with the story of the prodigal son. And I just knew this was going to be wonderful. I came in one of my fancy dresses. I usually wear these long dresses, these caftans, and I was the last one to get into one of the taxis. We all took in, not individual taxis, but got into taxis. I was the last one to get into one and the last one to get out of one because I had taken some stuff with me so I could be able to tell the story even better. Well, everybody was getting out of the taxis and walking up to the orphanage. And the kids were all there. And everybody who walked up got this smile and these hugs from these little kids. It was so wonderful. And I just couldn't wait. And I was getting the last of my things out. And I even saw they hugged people that had been there before, but they hugged new people too. So I couldn't wait to get one of those hugs. And I put on my best smile and I had the things in my hand. And I walked up, and most of my friends had already moved on. So I walked up and I went to the kids and they screamed and ran away. I was devastated. I mean, I understood why. In that area, there were no African American people. And I'm not a small woman. And if you've ever been to Vietnam, they are generally more small people than I am. So as far as these kids were concerned, I was the biggest Black person they'd ever met. I was no different than, well, King Kong, if you could think about it. But I say that of myself. It's all right. I say that because I understood their fear. And then the kids did the thing that kids do with each other sometimes when it's something that's kind of funny or kind of scary, where kids push other kids into the scary thing. And they were doing that. And I was heartbroken. But I didn't want to show it. I didn't want to go to my friends and say, I'm heartbroken, because I didn't want this to turn into something about me. So I decided I would just be quiet. And so I was. I was quiet, but I kept a smile on my face. And I decided I'd kind of just do whatever needed to be done. Well, the first thing we did when we got there is we did relay races. And so we did some relay races, and I helped one of the guys with our relay. And I just kind of helped in the background. I put out the cones. I handed whatever things that we were doing. If we were walking with a spoon and a ball in the hand, or if we were putting the cones out a different way. And I just did the background things. And the kids kind of just didn't come around me. And we did a couple of relays, and then they made a meal for us, and then we laid down for a nap. We were all required to do such. And so we laid down for a nap, and we woke back up, we got back with our kids, and we were relaying again. And again, I was just quiet. I didn't want anybody to know that my heart was broken, and I couldn't fix it. And so I kept doing what I did. Until my partner left. And he said, help the kids get ready for the next one. I have to go do something. And I was like, oh. And I had to count the kids. I had learned just enough Vietnamese to do it badly. And so I counted in Vietnamese, 1, 2, 3, counting the kids out. And one of the older kids just laughed. And I laughed too. And I pointed and said, do it. Could you count it? And he did. But he just kind of chuckled. And I got my first smile. I felt okay. Felt even better when we won that particular relay. And the kids felt pretty good too. So we were pretty good. So finally, at least a group of kids thought I was all right. Well, then it was time for us to share. And we started with a story. And I told the story of why toad is called uncle in Vietnam. And this old folktale tells about a time of a drought where a toad decides that the king of heaven has forgotten them. So he's going to make his way up to the king of heaven and tell him to open the windows of heaven. Along the way, he meets various animals. He meets bees who decide to go with him. He meets a rooster who decides to go with him. He meets a tiger who decides to go with them. And up they go until they get far up to the clouds to meet the king of heaven. When they get there, he says, "Stay here, I will go in." And when he jumps in, well, he's a little old and he's off kilter. And so when he jumps, he plans to land in front of the king. He lands on the king's lap. Now, while I'm telling this story, there's a woman who I've been getting to know, and she's interpreting. She's so excited. She is doing something she has been wanting to do for a long time, a little drama and story while she's interpreting. She's doing a great job following everything I'm doing. Well, the king is upset that a toad has jumped onto his lap. And so he brushes the toad off. And then he calls for the guards to come. Calls for the guards to come and take out that toad. Kill him indeed with their spears. But that's when Toad calls the bees. And the bees come and bite all the guards and they run away. Well, that makes the king even more unhappy. So he calls the thunder god. The thunder god brings his thunder drums and he attempts to break the eardrums of the small toad. But that's when Toad calls in the rooster, and the rooster cock-a-doodle-doos in such a way that the thunder god says, "No more, no more." And again, the toad tries to tell the king what's going on, but the king is furious. So he calls in his pure white wolf. And he sends the wolf, and the wolf comes down with mouth open to go on top of the toad. And he comes down to the toad, and the toad calls in tiger. And there's a fight back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until the tiger has the wolf by the neck. And a tiny bit of blood comes on that white fur. And the king says, "No, no, let him go, let him go." The toad asks for Tiger to let go. "What is it that you want?" says the king of heaven. He said, "You have forgotten us. The doors, the windows of heaven have not let down their rain." The king says, "Yes, I have forgotten. I'm so sorry." And he lets down the rain. And the toad turns to leave and says, "If you should forget again, I will come back." And the king says, "No, no, 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 no." And he calls him Uncle Toad, a sign of great honor. He says, "Merely croak very loudly, and I will send the rain." And that is why, as it's just about to getting to rain, you'll hear the toads croaking. I told that story, and the children loved it. And then I told another story. I said, "But we serve a king that doesn't forget us." And I told the story of the prodigal son, of the son who runs away and finds his own way and his own path and his own time, and then loses everything and comes back. And his father has not forgotten him. His father has been waiting to bring him home. And we serve someone who doesn't forget us. And all of them clapped again. And we shared more with them. And we watched them as some accepted the gospel that we shared and some did not. But we shared with them that day. And just as I was getting ready to leave with all my friends, picking up my things that I had, all around me were Vietnamese children hugging and holding and smiling. And I realized a story can break down a ton of walls.
Thanks for joining us for A Story from the Appleseed.